Hokage I'll become stronger when I'm fishing. Chapter 301-320. Chapter 301, Smoker's Intuition. Thank you all, come here, Her Royal Highness is all right. The Alabasta guards stationed on the shore came over, and the leader of the team spoke to Smog and the others who got off the warship. He pointed to the corpse over there and said, "The pirates have all been wiped out, and they are waiting for you to come and count them." Smoker frowned. Change to the General Navy, it must be very happy to encounter such a thing. Because you don't need to fight, you don't need to work hard to get credit, it's like a pie in the sky. But for Smog, after running hard, he found that the matter had been resolved. The rest of the work of collecting the corpses is for him to do, which is naturally a little uncomfortable. But when he was unhappy, he was too lazy to say anything. Mr. Smoker. Behind Smoker stood a girl with glasses, it was Dasky. At this moment, she has just joined the Navy, and her rank is only sergeant. Smog looked at the piled-up corpses and said, "Go check it out." Yes. Dusky nodded and led a team of one Navy towards the pile of corpses. "It's okay if she doesn't check it out," but she was taken aback when she checked it out. "I just felt a chill down my spine, a faint cold sweat broke out, and I couldn't help screaming." Mr. Smoker. What's wrong? Smoker was a little unhappy at first. Hearing Dusky's exclamation, he couldn't help but frown and look over, and at the same time, he stepped over there. Dusky took a deep breath, suppressed the shock in her heart, and said solemnly, "These corpses all have their internal organs smashed and killed in one blow. It's normal." Smog looked down at the corpses, and showed no surprised expression. This kind of thing a lot, and he has seen all the corpses on a ship with their throats cut with a knife. Dasky said, "No, look at this, this is the Jackal Gezi, the overlord of the West Sea, with a bounty of 42 million for Baileys, who died exactly like the others." Smog's complexion changed slightly, and he looked carefully. After seeing it, there was also a dignified look on his face. The bounty of 42 million for Baileys he said is nothing. But to kill and smash the dirty with one blow, it is not that easy to do. It is possible to say a sneak attack, but the whole ship was killed by one blow, and it was all one way of death, so the possibility of a sneak attack is very small. "Who did this, your people?" Smoker turned to look at the captain of the guard in Alabasta and asked him. The captain of the guard heard Smog's question, hesitated for a moment, and said, "I am very sorry, we don't know who did this." Smokey was startled. Captain of the guard spread his hands and said, "Originally, we did not hesitate to fight with that group of pirates to rescue Her Royal Highness, but by the time we arrived, these pirates were all dead, and Her Royal Highness was safe and sound." Dasky said in a stunned and disbelieving voice, "It's like this, but even if it's like this, how could it be that you don't even know who did it? Your princess should know." Captain of the guard responded, "His Royal Highness the Princess knows that it is a man and a woman, but she doesn't know them." "I don't know." Smaller keenly captured the key point and asked, "That is to say, the man and the woman are not from your Alabasta, but outsiders?" The captain of the guard nodded. Seeing this, Smog suddenly showed a look of contemplation. Being able to kill the Jackal G's with one blow is not ordinary. Even on the Great Route, there must be a famous person. From what the captain of the guard said, it seems that the other party happened to encounter the pirates. They rescued their princess, and now people seem to have entered Alabasta. "Mr. Smaller, what's next?" Dusky's subordinates dealt with the corpse and asked Smoker at the same time. Smog pondered for a while, a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes, and said, "Go to Alabasta and have a look, maybe you will meet them again. Although they are the princess who saved Alabasta, it is impossible to tell whether it is good or evil, and maybe they have some other purpose. A normal person saved the princess of Alabasta, how could he have contact with Alabasta, and it is normal to be entertained by the king. But after the man and the woman were rescued, they left without even leaving a name, which seemed a bit abnormal. Yes. Dusty responded. After disposing of the corpses on the shore, a part of the Navy was left to guard the warship. The rest of the Navy, led by Smoker, set foot on Alabasta. In this world, Navy is very common. Of Smog and others did not cause any shock, and Alabasta was still the same as usual. Smaller led the Navy and patrolled the streets of Alabasta all morning. No abnormality was found, and no pirates were encountered. Gone. Smog had a thoughtful look on his face. The more he couldn't find those two people, the more he felt that there might be a problem with the other, and it was probably a big problem. It was some kind of intuition he had been doing in the Navy for years. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 302. Do it, Dasky. Mr. Smaller, everyone is a little tired after searching all morning. Dusky walked to Smog and reminded Smog in a low voice, would you like to stop first and have something to eat? Smog didn't resist, nodded and said, okay. Many Navy soldiers carry dry rations. As for some senior officers, they came to the streets and walked into some restaurants to order and taste. Smog and Dusky also found a high-end restaurant and walked in. Alabasta's dishes have a flavor too. Sitting at the table covered with white cloth, Yagami Kanto tasted a few dishes. I thought it tasted pretty good, so I couldn't help but smile. Originally thought that there is nothing delicious in a desert country like Alabasta. After coming out of the funeral hall, he did not rush to find the ancient weapon Pluto, but went to a restaurant with Nina to order some dishes. After all, I flew all the way from Cake Island to Alabasta, and I haven't eaten for some time. Not bad. Nina nodded too. But just when she cut off a piece of meat and put it in her mouth, her expression suddenly froze, and she looked behind Yagami Kangdu. Nina was sitting facing the door, just in time to see the person walking in. Her eyes were falling on a man and a woman who walked in. Navy. Seeing the 2 Navy men, a man and a woman, walking in, Nina was slightly startled, but did not show any change in her expression. For her today, unless the Admiral of the Navy headquarters appears, she will not be moved at all. And it's not just her here, Yagami Kangdu is also here. Even an Admiral of the Navy would never dare to come over and ask for trouble alone. These 2 navies should not be stupid enough to trouble them, they should have just happened to come over for dinner. What's wrong? Yagami Aoto noticed the change in Nina's gaze, and did not turn his head to look behind. Instead, he ate a piece of meat and asked casually. Nina said indifferently, nothing. But just as her voice fell, Dasichi, who was ordering food, saw her inadvertently and was stunned for a moment. Because Nina was wearing a hat and her head was half down, Dusky couldn't see Nina's face clearly because of her gaze. But it still made her feel a little familiar. As the Navy, the most important task is the pirates with a memory bounty. Sensing that Nina's face was a little familiar, Dusky couldn't help but put down the menu and walked over. She tilted her head dumbly and looked at Nina's face for a while. It's rude to stare at others like that. Nina picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea, closed her eyes slightly, and said casually. At this time, Yagami Kangdu had already noticed Dusky and Smog. Was also a little surprised, but then he regained his calm, eating vegetables and drinking tea on his own. You. Dusky stared at Nina, frowning slightly. He helped the glasses on the bridge of his nose, and said somewhat uncertainly, this guy should be Nina. Nina chuckled and put down the teacup. Looking at Dusky, with an elegant smile on his face, he said, you guessed it right, Navy. Dusky's face changed. Chang. Almost in the next instant, she pulled out the sword hanging from her waist, showing an extremely vigilant and serious posture, and asked, Nina, captain of the Yagami pirates. Why are you here? Here. He. Of course you're here to eat, and don't point at me with that dangerous thing. Nina smiled lightly and raised her hand slightly. Black color of armament covered his arms with domineering, and instantly knocked Dasky's sword down. At the same time, the other hand reached out and grabbed Dusky's arm. Dusky struggled hard, but couldn't break free. Being held in place like this, I felt ashamed and angry, and there was a hint of fear in my heart. At this moment, a weapon suddenly swept over from behind. Oh shit! Nina sat there, tilted her head to look at Smog, held her cheek in one hand, and said, "It's Hilushi." Smokey looked at Nina with a depressed expression. I didn't expect the captain of the Iori pirates to appear here. What's your purpose here, Nina? Nina smiled lightly and said, "Didn't you say that? Of course you are here to eat." Smog snorted coldly when he heard the words, and a cold look flashed in his eyes. Took a deep breath and said, "Since you don't plan to explain, then I'll arrest you first, and then slowly torture you." The moment the voice fell, his arms suddenly turned into smoke. The hands holding the weapon suddenly passed over Yagami Soto's head and hit Nina's head. Squeak! La! Nina held a cup in one hand and kicked the table with her foot. The whole person suddenly slid back several meters with the chair, avoiding the blow of Smoker. At the same time, he took another sip of tea, a look of surprise on his face. Hey, it turned out to be a nature department. Seeing Nina's actions, Smoker's eyes suddenly flashed with anger. This has completely ignored him. Chapter 303. Conflict, Unilateral Crushing. Rage, Smoker turned into smoke and charged forward. He rushed towards Nina, waved his weapon 10 hands, and smashed at Nina one by one. Mr. Smoker. When Dusky saw this, he picked up his sword. He suddenly noticed that Yagami Kangdu was still eating. Woman mentioned by the Alabasta guards earlier, her complexion changed slightly. Could it be that the Jackal pirates are? Nina and this person were wiped out. It's very possible, thoughts flickered in her heart, and vigilance suddenly appeared in her eyes. If this is the case, then this man is probably also a member of the Yagami pirates. Dusky holds the hilt in her hand and turns it little by little. Nina and Smoker fight, and the restaurant is a mess. Countless people screamed and fled, but Yagami Kangdu continued to eat on his own as if he had never heard of it. The first thing that caught Dusky's eyes was the profile of Yagami Kangdu. It's not too white or too dark, it's a pretty decent complexion. It doesn't look particularly handsome, but it has a special aura that is completely different from any noble she has ever seen. The profile of her face made her movements pause for a moment, and her expression also paused a little. But he recovered quickly and continued to move to the front of Yagami Kangdu. This time, Yagami Kangdu's entire face was clearly seen. Whole picture of Yagami Kangdu, Dusky's hand suddenly trembled. He almost screamed out, and the blade in his hand was almost unsteady. I said, "Don't spoil my mood to eat." Yagami Kangdu inserted a piece of meat into his mouth and looked at Dusky. Dusky's hands were shaking constantly. She wanted to overcome the inexplicable fear in her heart, but she couldn't do it anyway. She really wanted to slash at Yagami Kangdu with a sword, but the fact was that in front of Yagami Kangdu, the sword in her hand was almost unsteady. I am really convinced by your navy. While eating, Yagami Kangdu said boredly, "Why did you all come to Alabasta?" Dusky wanted to answer, but couldn't make a sound. I said, "Don't stand there, what the hell?" Yagami Kangdu put down his knife and fork, took a sip from the teacup beside him, and looked at Dusky, who hadn't spoken yet. Dasichi forcibly calmed her mind, and finally withdrew from that trembling state. Her fingers clenched the hilt of the sword, and said, "That kind of problem has nothing to do with me. You are Yagami Kanto, even if you are the strongest in the world. I will arrest you." As if he had exhausted his courage, after shouting these words, Dusky slashed at Yagami Kangdu with his sword. When he was cutting, he even had to close his eyes. A sword fell. She didn't feel her sword hit anything. Surprised, she opened her eyes again. But I saw Yagami Kangdu still sitting there eating, without any other. This is what's going on. Even if he didn't cut Yagami Kangdu, he should have cut to the table. Why didn't his sword cut anything? Dasichi looked at the sword in his hand, and couldn't help but be in a trance. Arrest me. 8 Gods Kingdu took a carrot and put it in his mouth, saying, that is an extremely difficult task, even more difficult than becoming the world's #1 swordsman. When Dusky heard Yagami Kingdu's words, her dazed eyes suddenly narrowed. It seemed that a bit of faith and fighting spirit had rekindled again, and he swung his sword again in anger. Sigh. The sword passed through Yagami Soto and the table. The picture was exactly the same as before, as if the Yagami Kingdu in front of him was just a phantom, and the blade could not cut any substance at all. Dusky's face was unbelievable, believing, and he swung his sword frantically. But it couldn't even cut off the corner of the table, the blade cut through everything, as if illusory. I said, why do you want to arrest me so much because you're in the Navy? Yagami Kingdu sat there still, and asked in a very casual tone. Dusky's violent panting was not due to lack of energy. Instead, facing the unknown power of Yagami Kingdu, there was shock, disbelief, etc. Emotions. Hearing Yagami Kingdu's question, she couldn't help but grit her teeth and replied, I am the Navy, of course I want to arrest all the pirates. Oh. Yagami Kingdu responded lightly and said, then what is the definition of Navy and pirates? Hanging a skull flag is. Pirates. Those who don't hang a flag but burn, kill and loot are not considered pirates. Is it? Dusky has never debated issues such as position with anyone, or her little sergeant in the Navy has never reached the point of considering such issues. The question of what the Navy is, should be understood and pondered by those admirals. The Navy below the admiral does not need to think so much at all, just obey orders. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 304, The Faithless Dusky. Yagami Kingdu's words made her a little confused, her mind was chaotic, she couldn't help but said, of course the flag or something is not the key. Oh. Yagami Kingdu responded again and put the last piece of meat into his mouth. Picking up the handkerchief and wiping his mouth, he said, then you hang the flag of the Navy, defend the rights and interests of the Tianlong people, and loot the gold in the sky all over the world, what is it? Dusky was stunned, this sentence can be said to pierce his heart. In an instant, her so-called justice, which was originally not very firm, was torn to shreds. Yes, the flag is not the key, the burning and looting is the key. The Navy defends the Tianlong people and enforces the levy of gold from the sky all over the world. A country that does not pay the heavenly gold will be punished. What is the difference between this and a pirate? At this moment, Dusky only felt in a trance. Bang! The blade in my hand can no longer be held. It just fell to the ground. She has long been prepared to die rather than give in. Even if she died in battle, she would never retreat. But when she discovered that what she insisted on turned out to be meaningless, the fighting spirit and determination in my heart, like the melting of ice and snow, no longer exist. Stumbled and fell to the ground. His eyes were blurred and dazed, and various voices kept ringing in his mind. Yagami Kingdu put down his handkerchief, stood up, and glanced at Dusky. Boom! At this moment, the wall on his left suddenly shattered. Countless rubble splashed everywhere, and Smog flew upside down. He crashed into the store with a bang, and his back slammed into the wall on the right. Smog's strength is very good, the rank of Navy Colonel is too low for him, but after all, he is not as good as those elite lieutenant generals. And even those elite lieutenant generals may not be able to beat the current Nina cadre of the 4 Emperor pirates would be weak. Dusky. The corner of Smog's mouth, whose back hit the wall, overflowed. After he stabilized his body, he saw Dusky lying on the ground at a glance. However, he shouted at Dusky, but Dusky didn't respond at all, and the whole person was still sitting on the ground with blank eyes. This time, Smoker also finally noticed Iori. You are Iori Aoto. Yagami Kanto didn't respond, just stood there calmly. After Smog glanced at Iori Kingdu, he glanced at Dusky again, and couldn't help but grit his teeth and asked, what did you do to Dusky? Iori Kingdu said casually. It's nothing, it's just. I've been wanting to talk to a Navy about some things. I think she's kinder, so I just chatted a few words. You guy. Smoker gritted his teeth and wanted to shoot, but he forcibly stopped it. No matter how arrogant he is very clear about the gap between himself and Yagami Kenta. It was a chasm that was impossible to cross, not to mention Nina next to him that he couldn't deal with. Let's go. Yagami Kanto looked at Nina, who walked in, and said. Nina didn't look at Smog, but glanced at Dusky, who was blind, and then at Kingdu Iori. Iori Kingdu said with a strange expression, look at what I do. Nina followed Yagami Soto out of the shop. Smog watched Nina and Yagami Kanto leave, his fists clenched, but he still didn't dare to make a move. As for the Navy gathered outside, not a single one dared to step forward, and just watched Iori Kingta and Nina leave. Dusky, how are you? After Yagami Sudo and Nina left, Smoker took a deep breath. Only then did he look at Dusky sitting on the ground again, and asked Dusky. Dusky gradually recovered from the absent state, and she was silent for a while. Picking up the fallen sword, put it in the scabbard, then stood up, and said, I'm fine, Mr. Smoker. That's fine. Relief, it seemed that Yagami Kingdu still disdained to have the same knowledge as Dusky. Dusky lowered her head and was silent for a while, and said, I'm a little tired, Mr. Smog, can I go back to rest earlier? You go. Smog looked at Dusky, and seeing that she seemed to be hit, he still said, that guy is Yagami Kingta, not someone you can deal with now. It is normal for him to suffer losses, and it is a blessing to be able to save his life. Dusky nodded, looking absent-minded. Seeing this, Smog could only shake his head slightly. He thought that Dasuki's 3-stroke and 2-way defeat to Yagami Kingdu was a big blow, so he didn't care. Failure is not terrible, only when you come out of failure are you truly strong. Somewhere in the dark underground. The murmur of water rang in the damp ground, an underground river deep in the island. It is said to be an underground river, but it is actually connected to the sea. Chapter 305, Ancient Weapons, Pluto. In the middle of this underground river, a boat is parked there. It is full of ancient atmosphere, and the surface is covered with moss, as if it has gone through hundreds of thousands of years. Ancient weapon, Pluto. Is this the legendary ancient weapon, that product made by the Empire? Nina came to Pluto's side and touched the moss on it. She is not interested in the power of Pluto, but Pluto is an ancient weapon that spans the ages. It is a part of the history of that era, and researching that part of history has long been her life goal. I heard that one cannon can flatten an island. This power is not small. Yagami Soto looked up at the entire Hades ship. Like Whitebeard, or himself, now has the strength to easily destroy an island. Is not difficult to sink an island into the sea if no one stops it. It would be very difficult to say that a single blow completely flattened a large island. Yagami Kingdu hasn't tried it either, and he still doesn't want to use a large island to practice boxing. There is no doubt about the power of the Pluto ship, which can be ranked as an ancient weapon alongside the Neptune that controls the Neptune. A shot was fired at the Navy headquarters, and few people could stop it. Do you want to shoot the Holy Land when you go back? Yagami Kanto smiled at Nina. Nina said without looking back, that is to force the world government to fight us to the death, are you ready? Nina knows that Yagami Kingta's goal is not to be the fourth emperor, nor is it a one piece. To overthrow the world government after destroying all the pirates. Well, I am really not ready yet. Yagami Kanto nodded. Nina smiled and continued to study the hundreds of years of history contained on Hades. The Pluto ship is not an ordinary sailboat, but it is a little difficult to drive. Yagami Kanto and Nina ascended to Pluto and studied it carefully before they understood part of it. However, doesn't matter whether you can drive it or not, and Yagami Kingdu doesn't plan to drive Pluto to sway through the market. Of course, it is more stable to use the ability of reincarnation to write the Eye of the Wheel, and it is more stable to take the entire Pluto ship to fly back to the world. Let's go back and study again. Yagami Kangdu got dressed, saw that Nina was going to follow Hades, and said something to her. Went to the stern of the Pluto ship and drove it into the current. Whoops! The underworld, which had been stationary for hundreds of years, finally moved again, although it wasn't its own power. Yagami Kanto controls the ocean currents and pushes the Pluto ships to move forward in the underground river. The water level got higher and higher, and eventually filled the entire underground cave. Yagami Kangdu directly poured the sea water from the different dimension and rushed into the dark current. After walking for hundreds of meters, he finally rushed out of the cave. It appeared dozens of meters under the sea, and then quickly floated up. With the surging of the waves. Who has been silent for hundreds of years, finally sees the light of day. Get up. Yagami Kangdu took a deep breath and slowly lifted off the entire ship. Then quickly pulled up, and finally disappeared into the sky. World Government. Pongal Castle, Between Powers. The 5 old stars had already learned the news of Yagami Kangdu's appearance in Alabasta, and they gathered in the power room, discussing each other with solemn expressions. Alabasta. Why did Yagami Sudo go there? The Neferutali family is the only descendant of the original 20 remaining in the Nether. In other words, a traitor. Could it be that there is some secret collusion between Yagami Sodo and the Neferutari family? After all, that family was once the descendant of the king. Do you know something? The faces of the 5 old stars are a little cold and solemn. The Neferutari family and the others don't care. Although he is a descendant of the king, he chooses to stay in the lower realm and does not have the identity and power of a dragon. But if the members of this family know some secrets, and then collude with the Yagami pirates, it will not be a trivial matter. In fact, the current Iori pirates make the 5 old stars a little restless. If the 8 gods pirates attack the Red Hare and the Beast Kaido, they will snatch the history of the road sign. Conquering the Great Route, stepping on Ralph Drew, and becoming the new One Piece, they are not as alert as they are now. One Piece or something, it's not that it hasn't appeared in history. It will not affect the operation of the world government, but it will attract countless challengers to challenge. On the contrary, the world government can be happy to see this result. But Yagami Aoto has no intention of becoming One Piece, but continues to develop steadily. The internal governance and external expansion of Wengwo made the 5 old stars faintly uneasy. They always felt that the purpose of the 8 gods Kangdu would not be to simply govern all countries, to be an emperor over the sea. That's right. Alabasta may have clues to the ancient weapon Hades. One of the 5 old stars thought of something, and suddenly said with a solemn expression. Other 4 heard the words, their expressions changed. Phailu reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 306. Big news, the war is approaching. Yagami Sodo who appeared in Alabasta, there was also Nina. And Nina's identity is very mysterious, not even the 5 old stars can understand. But she knows that she has the ability to interpret the original text of history. It is very likely that she is one of the survivors of O'Hara. This combination immediately made the 5 old stars feel bad. The big thing is bad. If his purpose is ancient weapons, he may have succeeded by now. Iori Kangdu has mastered ancient weapons. I am in trouble. Several 5 old stars showed solemn and headache expressions. Originally, the 8 gods pirates were already their most troublesome force, and now if they had ancient weapons, it would be even more powerful. Judging from this situation, the Navy headquarters took a stance to fight the Yasumi pirates. Even if he can win, I am afraid it will be a tragic victory, and the casualties will be extremely heavy. Ancient weapons cannot fall into his hands. A 5 old star spoke in a deep voice. But the others were silent. They absolutely did not want to see ancient weapons fall into the hands of Yagami Kangdu. But how to stop it is a big question. It is impossible to send the entire Navy headquarters to the New World to fight against the Yagami pirates. This matter can't be stopped. What we can do is to get the design drawings of Hades as soon as possible, so that the people of Nine can move faster. The sword-wielding Five Old Stars said in a deep voice. With the design drawings, Vegapunk can replicate the ancient weapon Pluto. That's all it takes. A few people around nodded or sighed. Sky Island Bika. Months have passed since Yagami Kanto brought back the ancient weapon Pluto. The past few months, I have been studying Pluto, and I have basically been able to control it proficiently. However, the ship Yagami Soto was not placed at sea, but by the beach of Pika. Although the world government knows the existence of the Sky Island, its intelligence knowledge about the Sky Island is very low. Did Blackbeard defect? The Yagami Kangdu in the palace is holding a thoughtful look. The newspaper published the information that Black Hudic killed the captain of the Whitebeard Pirates Sage and defected from the Whitebeard Pirates. It's really big news. Nina also looked at a newspaper in her hand, thoughtfully, and said, "This self-proclaimed Blackbeard Tiki seems to be a very ambitious guy, but he can kill Sachi of the Whitebeard Pirates, and he will also retire the whole body, and the strength is not ordinary." Iori Kangdu said, "Not only what you said, if you investigate this person carefully, you will know that the scar on the red-haired face is also caused by him." Oh. Nina was slightly startled, and it seemed that she still underestimated this black-bearded Tiki. The Whitebeard Pirates have lost a captain, and their power has been greatly lost. Do you want to grab some islands at this time? After being surprised, Nina asked Iori Soto. The Eight Gods Kangdu shook his head and said, "Whitebeard's territory will not move for the time being. If you move Whitebeard at this time, the new world will be completely chaotic. A deeper consideration is that, if he does something with Whitebeard, it is hard to guarantee that Kaido will not take the opportunity to act. Coupled with the world government and the navy, you may not be able to earn anything at that time. Such a big thing happened to the Whitebeard Pirates. No matter the navy or the other four emperors, all eyes must be focused on the Whitebeard Pirates. It's already the 21st year of the Great Pirate Era." Yagami Kangdu glanced at the date in the corner of the newspaper, and said involuntarily, "It's very close to Luffy's departure to the sea." After Luffy left the sea, he soon arrived at the Chambord Islands. It is not long before the Top War. Although the world is already saying that this era is the era of Yagami Kangdu. But, in Yagami Kanto's view, this is just empty words. He can deal with 4 emperors, but he can't fight against 4 emperor pirates at the same time. It belongs to his era, it should be completely dominated by him. And the war at the top, for Yagami Kanto, will be the prelude to the next era. It truly belongs to his era. Nina, get ready. Eight Gods Kangdu put down the newspaper, looked forward with deep eyes, and said, "It won't be long before a great change will occur in this world." Nina stood by quietly, without asking anything. She could feel the silence at the moment, and it will break out at some point in the future. Half a month later, the Beast Pirates attacked the Whitebeard Pirates. The red-haired pirates and the Beast Pirates had a melee. The navy stepped into the New World, confronted the Whitebeard Pirates, and was repelled. Although Whitebeard lost to Yagami Soto, he lost the title of the strongest in the world. But as long as he himself is still there, and has combat power, the Whitebeard Pirates will not be easily destroyed. Just a few months' time. The whole new world is changing, and it can be said that wars break out in succession. Chapter 307. The Tide of Beasts, the Big Pirates of the Old Era, Shiji the Golden Lion. However, the Eight Gods Pirates, one of the 4 emperors, was stably guarding the waters of Wangguo, gathering forces within Wangguo, and did not step out of their own territory. Yagami Kangdu didn't do anything, and no one dared to come to trouble. Whether it's the navy or the other 4 emperors, even Kaido doesn't want to fight Yagami Soto now. And during this time, there was only one thing Yagami Kanto did, and that was fishing. Fishing, fishing, fishing. Most of his strength comes from the fishing system, so his strength still has a lot of room for growth. The chaos of the New World came to an end after several great battles. Neither the beast pirates nor the navy had any benefits. The sea has regained its calm again, but under this calm, undercurrents are surging. After time span to the 22nd year of the Great Pirate Era. The several battles that broke out in the New World seem to be the scene of yesterday. Of the Whitebeard pirates seems to be still vivid in my mind. When people's eyes were still on the Whitebeard incident, East China Sea, one of the four seas. After the execution of the pirate king Jirziji suddenly broke out a huge change that everyone could not expect. Town and country. In just half a month, countless casualties were caused. Several countries were destroyed, and the entire East China Sea was thrown into chaos. Some of these beasts were dropped, and some were local beasts that were mutated by injection of special drugs. The strength of each head is not trivial, and the general muskets and cannons have little effect on them. Incident broke out, the world government was shocked. The beast attack did not happen suddenly. But there is a prelude, that is, the threat letter issued by the Golden Lion Shiki to the world government. The source of everything points to one of the three legendary pirates who have been silent for 20 years after escaping from the advanced city. Golden Lion Shiki. Damn stuff. The angry voice of the 5 old stars came from inside the Pongal castle. The East China Sea was made the weakest sea by the pirates, that is, the most stable sea area ruled by the world government, but now it has become a paradise for beasts. This is undoubtedly a heavy blow to world politics. It's a scourge to jump out when you're planting. Call the Chihuahua, you can't let, continuation is bad. After the emergency meeting of the 5 old stars, on the one hand, they notified the Navy headquarters and asked the Navy to take immediate action. At the same time, they also issued a call to the Chihuahua that has not been done for many years. Hokage I'll, Si Sha Jinping, concentration point, Donghae, the other side. In the naval headquarters, Marshal Sengoku was also greatly shocked when he got the news. Immediately after getting angry, a large number of warships and combat power were dispatched to the East China Sea. Who has been in semi-retirement, had already rushed to the East China Sea on a warship as soon as he learned of the incident. Donghae is his hometown. If Windmill Village is also attacked by beasts, that's fine. Damn. Golden Lion, Ski. Standing at the forefront of the warship deck, Garp's expression was a little anxious, but at the moment he could only clench his fists, and there was a rare look of anger in his eyes. This time he was really angry. If he can find the Golden Lion this time, he has to beat the Golden Lion out of shit. New World. On the Moby Dick. Whitebeard sat there with a hanging bottle, looking at the newspaper, and said to himself, Golden Lion. After so many years of planning, has it finally jumped out? After the Golden Lion escaped from prison, he once came to drink with him. Said to disappear temporarily for a period of time, and there has been no news for 20 years since then. Chambord Islands. In a bar somewhere, Hades Raleigh is holding a bottle. Looking at the newspaper in his hand, his eyes were a little deep and he said, At this time, do you still want to do this kind of thing? Although Roger and Whitebeard often clashed, sometimes they could sit and drink together. But the Golden Lion and them have been mortal enemies from beginning to end. Now that such a thing is suddenly done in the East China Sea, even with the temperament of Hades Raleigh, he is a little frowning and annoyed. If it weren't for his age, he might have to go to the East China Sea. The first half of the Great Route. Somewhere in the sea, a ghostly boat is drifting with the current. In front of the boat, there was a tragic scene. Countless boats and logs were scattered everywhere, and countless corpses were floating on the sea. The flag hoisted is the flag of Admiral Creek of the East China Sea. There is only one person on the boat. The world's greatest swordsman, Eagle-Eyed Mahawk. He was spending time wandering the sea with nothing to do. He happened to meet the fleet of Admiral Crick, who had embarked on a great route from the East China Sea, so he easily defeated it. Just as Hokage was sitting in a small boat and continued to slowly pursue the last boat of the Creek fleet, the phone bug in his pocket suddenly rang. Philo reminds you. 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 308. The army is dispatched, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, the Dragon. On the other side of the phone bug, is the world government. After conveying the order for the emergency call of Shichibukai, he briefly described the specific situation. Golden Lion Shiki. Hanging up the phone bug, Hokage showed a thoughtful look. And Whitebeard, the Golden Lion is a legendary pirate of the last era. When the Golden Lion became famous, he was not the #1 swordsman in the world, just a little famous swordsman. Looking at the sea in the distance, Hokage was sitting in a small boat and went to the East China Sea. Although he was noncommittal to the world government's summoning order from the 7 Wuhai seas, he himself went out to sea to pass the boring time, so it would be fine to go there. This Creek fleet seems to come from the East China Sea. Hokage recalled the words of a certain pirate who shouted that they were the strongest fleet in the East China Sea. The urgent call of the Shichibukai, the large-scale operation of the Navy. Coupled with the name of one of the 3 legendary pirates, the Golden Lion Shiki, and the large number of pirates who are willing to follow the Golden Lion. A time. The eyes of the whole world are all focused on the East China Sea. Sky Island Bika. Inside the palace. After the East China Sea incident broke out, Yagami Kingdu naturally got the news immediately. After getting the news, his first reaction was a little surprised. In my impression, the Golden Lion is indeed doing some kind of beast mutation, but it should not be this time. And before it broke out, he was defeated by Luffy. Counting the time, Luffy probably hasn't left the sea for a long time now. Is it because of me? Yagami Kingdu showed a thoughtful look. In fact, he guessed right, because he had a deep conflict with the Golden Lion. After he defeated Whitebeard, the Golden Lion was shaken. Speeding up my plan, I finally implemented the previous step. The government has issued an emergency call to Chiwahai, and I also dispatched a fleet. It is said that Garp also rushed back to the East China Sea overnight. What are you going to do? Nina stood beside Yagami Kanto and asked Yato. Her tone was calm, with a hint of coldness in her calm. Obviously, the behavior of the Golden Lion, which created a beast and slaughtered it wantonly in the East China Sea, made her very uncomfortable. Chiwahai urgently called. It seems that the world government is also angry. The 8 gods Kingdu shook his head, a cold look flashed in his eyes, and said, but that guy from the Golden Lion, I still have an account to settle with him. He has always made the intelligence troops under his command stare at the Golden Lion, but because the Golden Lion flies in the sky all the year round, at an altitude of 10,000 meters. Unless he actively exposes it, it is like looking for a needle in a haystack, and there is no way to find his person. Now, the Golden Lion jumped out in the East China Sea. Today's Yagami Kingdu, in many cases, has regarded this world as his own. The Golden Lion went to the East China Sea to slaughter wantonly, which in itself was an unpleasant thing for Yagami Kingdu. What's more, the previous feud with the Golden Lion has not been resolved. After Yagami Kingdu made a decision, he stood up and said to Nina, let me smile. Good. Nina nodded and took out the phone bug to inform Fujitora. Going to the East China Sea this time, Yagami Kingdu doesn't plan to take Nina with him. With the summoning order of Chiwahai, the large-scale deployment of the Navy, Garp, and the leader of the Revolutionary Army, Long, who may also be in the East China Sea, the East China Sea is now completely muddy water. Although Nina's strength is not bad, in front of Hokage, Tyrant Bear and Admiral, is still much weaker and does not have the power to protect itself. The purpose of this trip to the East China Sea is to personally kill Shiki the Golden Lion, who is powerful and capable of flying, is the best choice. The only trouble is that if you take Fujitora to the East China Sea, Yujixi will stay in Wonguo and no one will suppress her. But Kingdu Yagami didn't think that Shiryu of the Rain dared to disobey his orders and toss something. Speaking of which, this time is really unfortunate. The Straw Hats have entered the difficulty of hell directly. Thinking of Luffy's group, Yagami Kingdu couldn't help but chuckle. Beast attack, coupled with the large-scale fleet of the Navy, the urgent call of Wang Shachiwahai. The situation in the East China Sea is no less than the outbreak of a war on the top. You know, Luffy and his gang have not even set foot on the Great Route yet. If you are unlucky, it is possible to die in the East China Sea like this. The Straw Hats. Nina had already informed Fujitora, and she couldn't help but be surprised to hear what Iori Soto said. Iori Kingdu thought that the Straw Hats are not well known and unknown, and said, well, it's a little-known little pirate. But the captain is Garp's grandson, and the cook on board is Reiju's younger brother Sanji. Nina heard the words, she couldn't help but startled slightly, and said, Cap's grandson ran and became a pirate. Yagami Kingdu said indifferently, his son is still the leader of the Revolutionary Army. Nina was slightly moved and said, Dragon is Garp's son. Seeing Nina's astonished gaze, Iori Soto realized that this information has not yet been exposed. Except Long and Garp and other few people, even the Demon King Ivankov doesn't know. 3. Chapter 309, Straw Hat Pirates. That's right. Iori Kingdu nodded and replied, if you go to investigate in detail, you should be able to find some clues. East China Sea. Somewhere in the sea, a small sailboat was sailing downwind, and there were 666 men on board. You really plan to go to the Great Route with 555 people? Sanji took a cigarette and looked sideways at Luffy. Luffy stretched his waist and smiled and said, I really want to bring Nami back quickly, and then leave immediately. Don't underestimate the sea so much. Sanji looked back, although he didn't know much about the Great Route, but compared to the one-strand Luffy, he still knew the horror there. Luffy held his chin and said, if you have all your partners, you can go to the Great Route, because it's a paradise. Paradise is a pirate grave. Sanji's strange way. Luffy smiled and said, when I left the restaurant, the uncle told me, and some people called the Great Route a paradise. Just as Luffy was laughing, there was a terrifying voice from Zoro's younger brother, Johnny, who said, you are so naive. Big brothers. With a trace of sweat on Johnny's forehead, he looked at Luffy and the others with great awe and said, brothers don't understand the Great Route too much, so let's just say that this time, if there is an understanding of this aspect, Big Brother Zoro will definitely be with us. Back. It's time to eat, so be it. Luffy stretched and ignored Johnny's words. Johnny glared, listen to me. Do you know why the Great Route is called the Pirate Grave? Because there are 3 major forces there, one of which is the king goes to the Chiwahai. 7 Wuhai. When Luffy and the others heard this, they couldn't help but look over. Johnny raised a finger and said very seriously, yes, it is. The 7 pirates recognized by the world government. Shichibukai's business is to plunder the affiliated countries and other pirates that are not under the world government alliance. Although they are called the lackeys of the world government, they are very powerful. The one who defeated Big Brother Zoro. Eagle. It is one of the 7 seas under the king. Zoro leaned against the edge of the ship's board, his eyes flickering slightly when he heard this. It was not long after his injury was dealt with, his vitality was strong enough, and a shallow layer of scab had formed under the bandage. Does someone as strong as that Hawkeye still have 666s? Usopp was startled and couldn't help showing horror. Trace of sweat dripped from Johnny's forehead and said, this is just one of the 3 major forces. The other of the 3 forces is the Navy headquarters. Everyone present has dealt with the Navy more or less. Luffy and Zoro had also knocked over a Navy colonel before. Hearing this, he was not too surprised. Johnny looked at Luffy and the others, took a deep breath, and said with a very depressed expression, and besides Chiwahai and the Navy, the 3rd remaining power is 4 emperors. Johnny, who is a pirate hunter, is undoubtedly more professional than Zoro, who became a pirate hunter halfway to earn money because he got lost and had no money. About the major forces and all kinds of pirates. 4 emperors. Sanji let out a breath of smoke. Johnny said solemnly, yes, those are the 4 most terrifying 44 pirates in the world, and even the world government and the navy have nothing to do with them. Those who provoked them, without exception, all ended tragically. They are so powerful that they can rule a sea area, like emperors, so they are called the 4 emperors. It's amazing. Luffy heard Johnny's words, he couldn't help being a little excited, and said, it's decided, we'll set off as soon as we find Nami. PFF'd. Johnny almost spat out a mouthful of old blood, and he really wanted to open Luffy's head to see what was inside. Hey, do you know how terrifying the 4 emperors are? There is an immortal body in Kaido's legend, and that Yagami Kangdu, the strength is recognized as the strongest in the world. Eat and eat. Luffy ignored Johnny's words and stood up excitedly. Going to the cabin, Zoro and the others took a look, and they all followed into the cabin. This is the village of Kokoja in the northwest of the East China Sea, and Nami's hometown, which is being ruled by the Murloc Aaron. In the sunny weather, a small sailboat sailed slowly towards the island. On the boat, 2 figures sat opposite each other. One of them was holding a wooden stick, his eyes were closed, and there were 2 scars on his eyes. The other looked even, leaning against the side of the boat. Well, it doesn't look like it's too late, this place hasn't been attacked yet. Getting closer to the island, Yagami Soto stood up. Looking at the direction of Kokoja village from a distance, seeing and hearing the color release, it is easy to judge that this place has not been attacked by beasts. Due to the large area of the East China Sea, although the Golden Lion raised the banner of the Flying Pirates, it attracted a large number of pirates to join. But that alone was not enough to make his massacre plan cover the entire East China Sea. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 310. Entering the East China Sea, new accounts and old accounts are calculated together. The attack of the mutant beasts started from the southwest of the East China Sea. And this Kokoja village is a sea area to the northwest. The Golden Lion's plan is to slaughter to create a great terror, with which to deter the world government. From this, it dominates the entire East China Sea, and then expands to other sea areas. And Yagami Kangdu knew from all kinds of information that a sea area not far from Kokoja village had been occupied. Kokoja village is likely to be the next target of the Golden Lion. The Golden Lion is flying in the sky, and no one can find where the others are. But since he was going to launch an attack, he couldn't hide in the sky all the time, and he had to come out eventually. Yagami Kangdu didn't plan to go to the sky to make a fuss, since the Golden Lion's plan was to rule the East China Sea, and this Kokoja village was already the next target. Just sit back and wait here. The intelligence we have, the government and the navy should know as well. Fujitora sat on the side of the ship, holding a cane in his hand and slowly opened his mouth. Yagami Kangdu said unconcernedly, it's okay to know, I only intend to settle an old account with the Golden Lion this time. If they dare to come over and ask for trouble, then clean up together. Speaking of this, a faint light flashed in the eyes of Yashin Kangdu. That is the domineering arrogance that belongs to the 4 emperors and the strongest in the world. And what about the admiral of the navy? He wants to find the Golden Lion to settle accounts. Whoever dares to intervene, let's clean up together. It's still as domineering as ever. Fujitora laughed. He is not very clear about the contradiction between Yagami Kangdu and Jin Shishi, but he can tell just by looking at Yagami Kangdu's attitude. It must be a deadly vengeance, and there is no need to ask why. Moreover, the large-scale slaughter of the Golden Lions in the East China Sea, creating terror, also made Fujitora unhappy. Therefore, when he learned that Yagami Kangdu was going to the East China Sea, and asked him to follow him, he came immediately. Yagami Kangdu smiled, domineering for a moment. But at this moment, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a ship in the distance, and couldn't help but be slightly surprised. That ship is The Golden Meli Yagami Soto didn't know what stage Luffy and the others' journey had reached, and he didn't deliberately ask the intelligence team to inquire. Because the East China Sea is in chaos now, it is difficult to fly and wait for the route of others to be affected. However, this Kokoja village is Nami's hometown, and he still knows very well. Therefore, it is not surprising to encounter the Golden Mary here. Of the two ships is the coast of the village of Kokoja. Yagami Soto didn't deliberately manipulate the current to increase the ship's speed, so the Golden Mary sailed a little faster, and gradually approached the ship that Yagami Soto and Fujitora were on. Almost right after Yagami Kanto's ship docked, the Golden Mary also docked. When Yagami Soto and Fujitora got off the boat, a figure on the Golden Mary also jumped off the boat. With a long, short orange hair, there is no doubt that it is Nami. Now 18 years old, she has a first-class perfect body. Compared with Nina, it is not inferior, and the short orange hair adds a bit of vigor and vitality. Hey, you two! Immediately after Nami jumped off the boat. Then he shouted at Yagami Aoto and Fujitora, "Who are you here and what are you doing?" Occasionally there will be outsiders in Kokoja village, but once they are known by the fishman Aaron, people will come and take all the money and throw it into the sea. Having witnessed this tragic scene many times, Nami will naturally not sit idly by. Iori Kangdu glanced at Nami and said with a light smile, "I happen to pass by here, I plan to get something to eat, and then take a rest before walking." Nami had already guessed that Yagami Soto and Fujitora were passing by, and when she heard Yagami Soto's words, she immediately putting on a cold face, he said, "No outsiders are welcome here, leave here quickly." Yagami Kangdu was slightly startled when he saw this, and then he thought of Nami alone on the boat. That is most likely to rob Luffy's ship and go home, which means that the island is still ruled by the fishman Aaron. In this case, Nami's attitude is normal. Fujitora stood beside Yagami Soto and said, "Is this your territory?" "I am sorry to disturb you." Looking at Fujitora's kind attitude, even if he said coldly, he is not angry, and he is also blind. Nami decided in her heart that she could not let the two honest people in front of her be persecuted by Aaron. "Do you know who Aaron is?" Nami showed a hint of arrogance and said, "This is the Aaron's territory, there is no place to rest. If you don't want to die here, leave now." "Aaron." Fujitora scratched the back of his head, a little confused, and said, "I am very sorry, I'm ignorant, I don't know this. Aaron is." Seeing that Fujitora doesn't even know who Aaron is, Nami is even more sure. The two people in front of them came here unintentionally, otherwise it would be impossible to have the guts to run here. Chapter 311. Shocked, Fishman Aaron. It doesn't matter if you hear it or not, you just need to know that staying here will endanger your life. Get out of here early, don't blame me for not reminding you. Nami said as she walked towards the island. We're so intimidated, those two people should leave consciously, she thought in her heart. This Aaron seems to have some notoriety. After Nami's back disappeared from view, Fujitora turned to look at Yagami Soto. Iori Kangdu nodded and said, "Yes, it is notorious in this area, and the reward seems to be 20 million Baileys." Fujitora said in disbelief, "I forgot that this is the East China Sea. It's so terrifying that it sounds like a character of the Chihuahua Hokage level." As a result, the bounty was not even comparable to his subordinates. This Aaron actually has some origins. Yagami Kangdu smiled and said, "I used to be a member of the Sun Pirates, just like Jinpei. When Tiger the Murloc died, he and Jinpei parted ways. That's it." Hearing Jinpei's name, Fujitora nodded. One of the 7 Seas of Wuhai, Jinping, is indeed a character. With Jinping, he is not a nameless person. Come on, let's go to the island and go around. Yagami Kangdu walked towards the interior of the island. Although there is a good chance that this is the next attack area of the Golden Lion, he will not wait here. Thinking of Nami's cold tone of letting them leave, Fujitora shook his head and followed Yagami Soto to the depths of the island. Inside Aaron Park. After warning Yagami Soto and Fujitora, Nami came all the way here. "Oh, I'm back, after so long, what's the harvest this time?" Grinned at Nami when he saw Nami walking into the park. If you do the math, Nami should have saved up to 100 million Baileys soon. He would not let go of such a good navigator who painted sea pictures. But he didn't intend to break his promise, so he had to think of a way. Not clear what Aaron is thinking about not breaking his promise and continuing to control Nanami. Working hard for so long and saving up to 100 million Baileys, the goal of Kokoja village is almost achieved. Thinking of this in my heart, the sadness of parting with Luffy and the others faded a little. Just when Aaron grinned, greeted his subordinates, and was about to hold a banquet. An earth-shattering roar suddenly came from outside a long park. Roar. This roar made the ears of countless people buzzing. Nami was staggered by the shock and almost fell directly. I just felt a humming in my head, and I couldn't help covering my ears. Was a look of horror on his face, not knowing what was going on. What's the matter? Aaron was also shocked by this voice, his face changed, and he stood up abruptly. The fish people around looked at each other for a while. You look at me, I look at you, no one knows what happened. That, Boss Aaron, I seem to have heard Colonel Mouse say that there are beasts in the nearby sea area, and they have attacked several islands. Beast. Aaron snorted coldly and said, "What kind of beast? We fish are the real beasts. Come and see with me, it seems that there is meat to eat tonight." Almost as soon as Aaron finished speaking and was about to go outside, the walls of Aaron Park burst into pieces. The silverback giant ape with a height of 5 or 6 meters smashed the wall and broke in like this. Ah! With the roar of the wall being smashed, Nami screamed. Subconsciously, he fled far away and fled to the other side of a long park. Seeing that the wall of Arong Park was smashed into pieces, Aaron was furious. When he looked at the silverback giant ape, there was a cold gleam in his eyes. "How dare you come here?" Whoosh! He walked over to meet the silverback giant ape. The silverback giant ape roared and threw a huge fist at Aaron. Aaron also had a cold face, and he also punched up. Bang! The fists collided, and a muffled sound exploded. I saw Aaron's face change for a while, after a stalemate for a second. The whole person staggered back and was knocked back several steps by the silverback giant ape. "Boss Aaron! How is it possible?" When the Murlocs nearby saw this, they couldn't help showing some disbelief. Their Murloc arm strength is 10 times that of humans, and Aaron is the best among them. The bounty of 20 million Bailey does not meet Aaron's true strength at all. But such Aaron was actually repelled by the beast. Where did this beast come from? How could Aaron be? Nami, who was not far away, saw this scene, and her face changed. Showing a stunned look, he didn't expect this beast to be such a ferocious mess. Even Aaron can't seem to beat. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 312, Desperate Nami, Horror Beast Tide. Under the watchful eyes of the public, he was repelled by the silverback giant ape. Aaron's face finally showed fury, and with an angry roar, he rushed towards the silverback giant ape. After avoiding the punch of the giant silver-backed ape, he slammed into the leg of the giant silver-backed ape. Sharp teeth pierced through the fur, trying to tear off a piece of flesh. However, the muscles of the silver-backed giant ape are as tough as one can imagine, and Aaron bit hard, but he couldn't pull it off. And compared to the huge size of the silver-backed giant ape, the piece of meat he bit was nothing at all. Being bitten on the leg by Aaron, the silverback giant ape was also completely furious. An angry slap slapped out, knocking Aaron upside down and smashing through the wall with a bang. Nami, who was hiding in the corner, watched this scene and received a huge shock in her heart. Who was almost invincible in her eyes, was beaten by this gorilla who appeared out of nowhere. Boss Aaron. Several Murlocs nearby saw this scene, and all exclaimed. They took out their weapons and surrounded the silver-backed giant ape. They could make a move. A roar suddenly came from outside the Arlong Park. I saw a few cold flashes, and the wall of that area was cut into countless pieces. A giant praying mantis about the size of the silver-backed giant ape showed its body. There is a second one. Seeing this giant praying mantis, the expressions of everyone present changed dramatically. Just by looking at this mantis, you know that it is not easy to mess with. I am afraid that its combat power will not be much worse than that. The silver-backed giant ape. Just when all the fish people present were a little panicked, a white spider web suddenly fell from the sky, instantly killing a corner of Dragon Park as blocked. I saw a black spider about the size of a mantis and a giant ape. Walking in directly from outside the wall, just a glance at it makes people feel creepy. Gouda, I don't know who swallowed. This group of murlocs, who usually think highly of themselves, were all panicked at this moment. In the corner, Nami, who was a little disappointed and in a trance because Aaron was hammered by the silver-backed giant ape, finally came to her senses at this moment. After returning to her senses, her complexion also changed drastically. Aaron was cleaned up by monsters, of course, but after that. In the eyes of these monsters, they are probably just food. Although Aaron is hateful, he did not slaughter a Hokage village. If these monsters occupied this place, it would be countless times worse than if Aaron occupied this place. Cold sweat broke out on Nami's forehead. After thinking of the seriousness of the problem, she couldn't help but grit her silver teeth. Thoughts flashed through my mind, thinking about how to solve the current problem. That even Aaron can't deal with, how can she think of a way to deal with it? No matter what she thought, she couldn't think of any way, and she was sweating profusely. The silver-backed giant ape roared and rushed towards Aaron, who was blasted away by it. Aaron took a bite from it, but it hasn't forgotten. Boom, boom, boom. Aaron, who was targeted by the silver-backed giant ape, was severely beaten by the silver-backed giant ape. At the same time, other murlocs are also being targeted by mantis and spider monsters. After a fierce fight, everyone screamed in agony, and the army was defeated. The entire Arlong Park is a mess, and the walls on all sides have been smashed. The three-headed monsters are running rampant here, and they are irresistible. What should I do? What should I do? Looking at this scene, Nami did not feel the pleasure of being ravaged by the Aaron pirates, but her heart gradually sank to the bottom of the valley. At this moment, Yagami Soto and Fujitora appeared in the distance. Is that the creature made by the golden lion? It's really ferocious. Fujitora unleashed a domineering look, feeling the three-headed monster, and couldn't help speaking in a deep voice. He put his hand on the handle of the sword. However, the ape god's Kindu waved his hand to stop him, and said, "This evil dragon pirate is not a good thing, so let them fight first." Hearing Yagami Soto's words, Fujitora's raised hand slowed down. And at this time, Nami, who was covered in cold sweat and had a chilled back, also found out about Yagami Soto and Fujitora, and couldn't help but feel anxious. How could these two people take her warning as a deaf ear, and still came here? And the point is, the situation is worse than she expected. Why are you two still here? Nami spoke to Yagami Soto and Fujitora, walked towards them, gritted her teeth and said, "Get out of here. You will die." Fujitora was about to say something, but Yagami Kanto was the first to say, "No hurry, I can't get here for the time being." Nami was almost annoyed by Yagami Kindu's words. Is this person crazy? Can't you see the three terrifying monsters here? And just when she wanted to say something, a scream came over. She couldn't help looking sideways, and suddenly saw a scene that made her tremble. Only see. The murloc Aaron was grabbed by the silver-backed giant ape by both legs, and was torn in half by the silver-backed giant ape in a scream. This scene made her face pale. Chapter 313, The Great Barrel, Basque Chote. It's over. It's over. But just when she was trembling, Yagami Soto and Fujitora who were beside her seemed to have noticed something at the same time, and looked up in one direction. There is the location of the mantis monster. At this moment, it has torn the two murlocs into several halves with their sharp sickle blades, treating them as fish meat and stuffing them into their mouths to eat. But this is its final move. Saw a strange force suddenly bombarded its head. There was a sudden pause in its movements, and its head shattered. The body of the mantis monster fell down with shaking. In front of its corpse, a figure appeared. It was a man nearly 7 meters tall, dressed in black and white, holding a book in his arms. Alas! Nami was stunned. She looked at the figure holding the book with a dull expression. Her eyes were full of disbelief. That huge mantis monster was killed by this man. Tyrant, Bartholomew Bear. Yagami Kangdu, who was standing beside her, softly read out the identity of the other party. Since the government has urgently summoned Chiwahai, the tyrant Shang is naturally among the responders, and his speed is beyond doubt. Arrive here in a short period of time, Yagami Kanto is not surprised. Bartholomew Bear. Nami, who was standing next to Yagami Kangta, heard Yagami Kangta's words with a hint of shock on her face, and turned her head slightly to look at Yagami Kangta. Yagami Kangdu said, "He is a pirate under the world government, one of the 7 Wuhei under the king, and a Superman who has the ability of the flesh ball fruit. Those palms are said to be able to deflect everything, including the air, and the bounty before becoming the king of Chiwahai is 296 million 2 Baileys. 290 million 2 Bailey. Nami felt a dizziness in her head and a tremor in her heart. She doesn't know much about Wangxia Chiwahai, but the bounty of 290 million 2 Baileys. What kind of concept is the bounty of the Murloc Aaron, which is only 20 million Baileys, the gap? After killing the mantis monster, Basu Bear turned his head to look at the other 2 monsters. His body swayed, and the whole person suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Jin. Because this monster is very harmful, he has no plans to shoot it directly. Instead, he raised his bear-like hand and slapped the silver-backed giant ape's head. Om! A shock burst out suddenly, and the silver-backed giant ape's head was torn apart by the slap of the Bartholomew Bear. The entire body is even more sunken down and embedded in the ground. Immediately afterwards, his body flickered again and came to the front of the spider monster. Of the palm of his hand, a bear paw-like impact appeared in the air, instantly penetrating the body of the spider monster. The spider monster's legs shook a few times and stopped moving. Of the tyrant bear to the time he killed the 3 mutant monsters, it only took a few seconds. Nami in the distance looked at this scene, but her mind went blank. After killing the 3 monsters, Bartholomew did not notice the existence of Yagami Sudo and Fujitora, but turned his head to look behind the broken Aaron Park. Lululu, it's you, Bartholomew Bear. In that direction came a man with a red nose and a wine gourd on his back. Seems to know Tyrant Bear and doesn't show any fear. Bartholomew looked at each other expressionlessly, and said in a gentle tone, "Have you partnered with the Golden Lion, Bask Chot?" Not far. The shock in Nami's heart eased a little, and she couldn't help showing a look of surprise when she looked at Bask Chot who was facing off against the Bartholomew Bear. That person, who is it? Large Barrel Bask Chot. Yagami Kanto narrowed his eyes and looked at Bask Chot. He had some impression of this person. Should be a member of the future Blackbeard Pirates, but now he should be imprisoned in the 6th floor of the infinite hell of the Advanced City. Yagami Kangdu pondered. Most of the time he escaped from the Advanced City, he took the opportunity to run out from the 6th floor, and now it seems that he has joined the Golden Lion's command. The Great Barrel, Bask Chot. In Nami's eyes, and there was a hint of doubt in her tone. But he didn't expect Fujitora next to him to know a lot and took over the topic. The vicious pirates killed several towns because of drunkenness more than 10 years ago. There is a bounty of 400 million Baileys, but he should have been taken to prison by the Navy. Fujitora held the handle of the staff sword, and there was a hint of doubt on his face. 400 million Baileys. Nami's heart was shaking violently again. What kind of monsters are these people? The bounty is 400 million Bailey. it's like a joke. She has always wanted to save 100 million Bailey to redeem Kokoja from the Murloc Aaron. It took 10 years for this. But the bounty of the two people in front of you, any one of them, is far more than 100 million Bailey. Philo reminds you, 3 things in reading: collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 314, The First Swordsman, Hokage Mahawk. Your purpose will not succeed. Where is the golden lion? Bartholomew didn't say much, and he didn't mean to reminisce with Basque, but spoke to Basque in a calm tone. Basque took off the wine gourd on his back, gulped down a mouthful, and grinned. Do you think I'll tell you so casually? Bartholomew was silent for a moment, then took off his gloves. Seeing this, Basque snorted and said, I heard that you have been the king of the 7 Marshal-Seas for all these years. I wonder if your strength has improved a little compared to before. In the next instant, the Bartholomew bear pushed out at Basque with a palm. The meatball fruit's ability was activated, and a shock wave like a bear's paw was instantly pushed out of the air. Basque was not afraid, and punched it. Boom! The impact and the fist collided together, and a roar erupted in an instant. The air was punched with ripple-like traces, and the terrifying power was wrapped in a terrifying air wave that swept in all directions. The air waves formed by the aftermath of this confrontation rushed over, and Nami, who was blown in an instant, was unsteady, and the whole person staggered backwards. Took 5 or 6 steps back in a row, and then, when she couldn't maintain her figure and fell to the rear, the whole person did not fall down, but accidentally bumped into Yagami Kengdu's chest. Yagami Kanto reached out to support Nami's body and let her regain her balance. What is this? Are they still human? Nami, who regained her footing, still had a shocking look in her eyes, looking at the Bartholomew bear and Basque in the battle. Boom, boom, boom. The roar continued to explode in the field, but the Basque, who had been in prison for many years, had not made any progress in strength, and he was no match for the tyrant bear. After more than a dozen moves, he was already at a disadvantage. Speaking of the whereabouts of the golden lion, can you win? The Basque bear came to the back of Basque with a flicker, slapped him with a slap, and said to Basque with no emotion at the same time. Basque didn't expect that his strength was actually no match for Tyrant Bear. But how could he be submissive at such a time? The fierce color flashed across, and he continued to charge at the Tyrant Bear with a roar. Aftermath of the fierce battle between the two broke out. Nami, who was watching from a distance, was shocked, but she felt a little blank in her mind. Compared with the Bartholomew bear, Aaron is simply a miscellaneous fish. And just as she was shocked, Nami suddenly thought of the villagers of Kokoja village, and she couldn't help but feel agitated. Oops, what do you guys do? I have to let you guys run away quickly, and you should get out of here too. Nami spoke nervously and worriedly, and then ran towards the village. However, the 8 gods Kangdu stopped her and said, do you want the villagers to leave this island? I don't recommend you to do this, because there may be a lot of those mutant beasts gathered in the sea. Then what should I do? Nami was a little flustered for a moment. 8 God Kangdu said calmly, don't panic, I don't think those villagers will take the initiative to come here. As long as they stay away from the battle center, there will be no problem. After listening to Yagami Aoto's analysis, Nami's heart relaxed a little. At the same time, he also looked at Iori Kangdu with a strange look. He didn't expect Iori Kangdu to be so calm under such circumstances. And when the Bartholomew bears and the Basques are fighting fiercely, a dazzling sword energy suddenly broke through the air and attacked Basque's body. That seems to be able to cut off everything. It is impossible to resist. Resist. Kai. Basque's face changed, and the whole person turned over flexibly. Dangerously, he avoided this sword energy, but his cheek was still rubbed, and a blood stain appeared. This terrifying sword energy swept across in the blink of an eye, splitting the fragmented Arong Park from the center, and spreading all the way to the end of the line of sight. Ah! Nami screamed in horror, almost jumping up in fright. The line swept by the sword energy was only more than 10 meters away from where she was standing. Until the sword energy completely disappeared at the end of the line of sight, looking at the abyss-like ravine that was cut out of the earth, Nami's voice trembled. What is this? She looked in the direction from which the sword energy had struck, and saw a man in a black trench coat, a top hat, and a large black knife standing quietly in that direction. 8 Gods Kangdu glanced sideways at the other party and said, "That guy is the king of the 7 Wuhai, the world's largest swordsman, Hokage I'll. The greatest swordsman." When Nami heard Yagami Aoto's words, she only felt a shudder in her heart. Although she doesn't know anything about kendo, she is undoubtedly the most terrifying existence in this sea to be named the world's #1. What the hell is going on today? Why are such terrifying guys one after another? Appear in Kokoja. To see the underlined version of the novel, please download the Filu novel. Chapter 315, General Aokiji appears. Nami felt a little dizzy in her head. After swinging a knife and being avoided by Basque, Hokage did not swing the second knife, but calmly put the black knife back on his back. Hokage. Naturally, it was impossible for Basque not to know Hokage. He was no longer as calm as before, but a cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and said, "Is there two appearing in the Chiwahai under the king?" Although the tyrant bear is powerful, if there is only one person, he may not be able to do anything to him, but if you add another eagle eye, then the problem will be serious. Just when Basque's face darkened, a voice suddenly it came from a distance, with a hint of evil in his tone. "Hokage. I didn't expect you to respond to the call of the world government." I saw a man with a western sword hanging from his waist, walking from a distance. There was a sinister smile on the corner of his lips, and his eyes were fixed on Hokage. Hokage turned to look at him. "Abslok. You know me." Scrooge smiled evilly. Hokage looked at each other and said calmly, "It's strange if you don't know each other. I am very interested in the Golden Lion's plan, so I plan to cooperate with him. If you want to sabotage our plan, then I'll have to fight you." Screw said as he drew his sword. Far away. Looked at Screw from a distance, leaning on a wooden staff, and said solemnly, "Pirate Hunter, Absrock, has he joined the Golden Lion's command?" Abslok. Nami stood aside, vaguely feeling that she was about to hear another character. Sure enough. At the next moment, Yagami Kangdu said calmly, "The pirate hunter, Absrock, once hunted down the pirates with a bounty of 470 million for Baileys. He is the strongest swordsman among the pirate hunters right now, and I didn't expect to join the Golden Lion's command." Nami's head felt dizzy when she heard this, and she couldn't help but ask again, then. Who is the Golden Lion? Yagami Kangdu glanced at her and said, "The legendary pirate before the era of the great pirates, and the pirate King Roger and Edward Newgate with the white beard stand on a 3-legged stand. There are countless battles with each other, and they once brought the pirate king to a desperate situation." Nami felt that her heart couldn't take it anymore. And just when the voice of the 8 Gods Kangdu fell, the eagle eye in the field looked at Screw, pulled out the black sword knight on his back again, and said, "I'm not interested in your plan. Jia hoo, it's my honor to be able to fight with you." As a swordsman, Screw naturally has the idea of challenging Hokage, the world's largest swordsman. At this moment, holding the hilt of the sword, there was a sharpness in his eyes, and he swung the sword. Om! A jet-black sword chi flew out of the sky, like a thunderbolt piercing the void. Hokage backhanded a sword, and the dazzling sword energy swept across. It collided with the black sword energy in the air, and a thunderous roar erupted. Kai, 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 2 sword chi bursts intertwined in the air, and finally exploded into countless tiny sword chi and splashed in all directions, cutting cracks into the ground. Nami let out a terrified cry again. The ground around her was less than 3 meters away, and 2 deep ravines were cut open by the broken sword energy. Yagami Kangta stood beside her and frowned slightly. He has been unleashing the domineering arrogance of seeing and seeing, looking for the trace of the golden lion. But so far, the golden lion has not shown any signs. Boom, boom. In the fierce confrontation between four people on the battlefield, Tyrant Bear and Eagle Eye are obviously stronger than each other. After a short confrontation, they all showed a state of suppression. 4-player-4 battle was like turning the world upside down. A long park has long since become a ruin that can no longer be broken, and completely ceases to exist. Looking at these four people, every blow erupted with a huge aftermath, shaking all directions. Nami only felt that the whole person was a little numb. And while the fierce battle continued, an icy cold air suddenly came from a distance, and I saw a figure wearing a Navy Justice cloak at the end of the line of sight, riding a bicycle towards this side. Where the wheels of the bicycle rolled, the ground condensed into ice piece by piece. The land full of ravines was filled with ice, and the ride was extremely smooth. Who is this time? Nami was already a little numb. She felt that she was like a miscellaneous fish among a group of bosses, watching the bosses pretending to be one after another. Her heart was filled with a deep sense of powerlessness. She already regarded Hokage as monsters, and did not regard them as normal humans at all, but fortunately there were two normal people beside her. Admiral of the Navy Headquarters, Ching-ji. Yagami Kanto looked at the figure riding a bicycle and spoke calmly. The introduction this time was unusually short, but it made Nami's mouth twitch. The highest-ranking officer she had ever seen was only a major general. What is the concept of a general? Ah la la, it's too late. Chingzi rode his bicycle to a stop not far away, scratching the back of his head. Park the bike on the ice and walk towards the battlefield. Filu reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 316, Shocking Everyone, the Head of the 4 Emperors. Chingzi didn't plan to let the tyrant Shang and others fight alone. Now that the Golden Lion has made too much trouble, the Golden Lion must be solved as soon as possible. Otherwise it doesn't matter. The Navy headquarters are the world government, I can't explain. After taking a few steps forward, he reached out and pressed down on the ground. Glacier. Era. Kacha. The ground that Ching-ji's palm touched, instantly condensed into ice. Spreads in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, Arong Park, which no longer exists, has been turned into a piece of ice and snow. This ice spread at an unbelievable speed, caught the flaws revealed by Basque and Tyrant Shang's fierce fight, and instantly froze half of his body to the ground. Nami was already numb watching this scene. A face is completely expressionless. She looked at Yagami Sudo and Fujitora next to her, and saw that Yagami Sudo and Fujitora also had the same expressionless expressions, and only then did she recover from that feeling of being out of touch with reality. Damn. Basque had already noticed Chingzi's arrival, but being entangled by the tyrant bear, he couldn't do anything at all. At this moment, half of his body was frozen, and he immediately stimulates armed arrogance. Tried to break free, but the tyrant bear's palm was pressed against his chest. A shock slammed into his body. Basque spit out a mouthful of blood, which splashed onto the ice. Leaving a bright red, the whole person's breath completely wilted. I didn't expect you to be here, Basque. It's really hard for you to escape from the advanced city. By the way, what is it? Chingzi walked towards Basque, scratched the back of his head, suddenly remembered something, and said, the Golden Lion has caused a lot of trouble, can you tell me when he will come over? Lululu. Basque lost his ability to resist, but he laughed and said, so that's the case, do you think the Golden Lion boss will come here? He won't come. Hearing Basque's words, Ching-ji suddenly. Can you tell me where he is now? Lululu, of course it's in the sky. Basque grinned, licked his lips, and said, as for where it is, I don't know. No matter how much you ask, you won't be able to find out. Chingzi frowned and turned to look at Scro who was fighting with Hokage. He didn't believe Basque's words, so he walked towards Scro, and it was also an ice age that passed by. Hokage frowned slightly at Chingzi's interference in his battle, but he didn't say anything, and finally put the Black Sword Knight back on his back. Qingzi froze half of Scrow's body, abolishing Scrow's fighting ability. It's really distressing that a pirate hunter has become a pirate again. Qingzi rubbed his brows, and when he saw Screw, he thought of other things. Feeling a headache, he questioned Screw in a stern tone. And Screw also had no fear, although his voice was sluggish. But there was still a hint of evil in his tone, and he gave the same answer as Basque. They were just sent down by the Golden Lion. The base camp of the Flying Pirates of the Golden Lion is a few islands floating in the sky at an altitude of 10,000 meters. These islands will move back and forth in the sky, and there is no fixed position. It's going to be difficult now. Qingzi looked at Scrow and Basque, rubbed his brows, showing a headache. Capturing Scrow and Basque is usually a feat. But now the core of everything lies in the Golden Lion, and it is useless if you don't catch the Golden Lion. Neither Hawkeye nor Tyrant Bear had any intention of interfering, and the two of them planned to leave with their swords on their backs. The other is standing holding the book from a distance and watching from the sidelines. And at this time, Yagami Soto, who was standing a few hundred meters away from Nami Fujitora, shook his head. It seems that it is useless to count on the Navy, and I have to go and interrogate it. Spoke, Yagami Kanto walked forward. Nami was in a state of numbness when she saw Yagami Aoto suddenly walking towards Qingzi and the others. Suddenly startled, he couldn't help saying, "Hey, you. What are you doing? I'll see if I can get any valuable information." Yagami Kangdu said without turning his head, and continued to walk forward. When Nami heard Yagami Kangdu's words, she couldn't help widening her eyes and said, "Are you crazy? There are a bunch of monsters over there." He, don't worry." Fujitora stood aside and smiled kindly, sensing Nami's nervous expression, as if she was about to step forward and hold Yagami Aoto. He interrupted her movement and said, "It will be all right." Nami said in a panic, "How could it be okay? You can't see it, you don't know what kind of monsters those guys are." Just when Nami was trying to pull Yagami Soto, the expressions of Qingzi, Hawkeye, Tyrant Shang and others who were present changed almost at the same time. All eyes were gathered. Chapter 317, Cooperation. You are not worthy. When they discovered the figure of Yagami Kangdu, almost all of them showed a hint of shock, whether it was Hawkeye or Qingzi. What surprised them was not that Yagami Kangdu appeared here, but how Yagami Kangdu appeared. In the perception of all of them, Yagami Kangdu seemed to appear out of nowhere. There was no sign at all, and there was no movement trajectory. And then, their eyes shifted to Fujitora and Nami who appeared out of thin air behind Yagami Soto. If only Yagami Kangdu appeared alone, it could explain it. Now three people suddenly appeared, and there was no trace of any movement at all. That is to say, the three of Yagami Aodo 3 stood there from the beginning, and all of them didn't notice it. This thought appeared. Whether it was Hawkeye or Qingzi, almost all expressions changed. If that's the case, then it's terrifying. Hawkeye has been looking for a chance to see how much difference there is between himself and Yagami Soto. But what happened in front of him made him fall into silence. The eight gods Kangdu. Qingzi stared at Yagami Kangdu, and half of his body turned into ice, already entering the highest degree of vigilance and vigilance. Even if Hawkeye and Tyrant Bear were here, he couldn't relax in the slightest. Not to mention, Hawkeye and Tyrant Bear. Will the Kibukai go his own way against the Yagami Kangdu? Even if Hawkeye and Tyrant Bear will make a move, there is still a squad leader of the Yagami pirates. There is no doubt about the strength of Fujitora. As for the woman next to Fujitora, she seems to be an ordinary person in perception. With Fujitora, Yagami Aoto is probably not ordinary, maybe someone of some kind. This time, Nami, who was standing beside Fujitora, was stunned. Stupid she is, she can see that something is wrong now. And the others seem to clearly know Yagami Kangta. And especially Qingzi, the admiral of the navy, is obviously posing as if he is facing a great enemy. They know. Of course I do. A voice came from behind Nami, replying to Nami's statement that she saw the third Shichibukai, and Haisha appeared in the rear. He walked slowly towards this side, glanced at Nami, and said strangely, "Don't you know? Because Fishman Island has become the territory of Yagami Aoto, Jinbei often deals with people from Yagami pirates, and his relationship with Fujitora is even very good." Seeing Nami standing next to Fujitora, he subconsciously thought Nami was a member of the Yagami pirates. But now it looks like something is not quite right. "No what?" Nami's eyes were filled with confusion. Although Jinping felt strange, he still replied, "He is the fourth emperor, how could anyone not know him?" Nami asked weakly, "4 emperors? What is it?" The corners of Jinping's mouth twitched. He has roughly guessed that this woman is not a member of the 8 Gods pirates at all, but should be an ordinary civilian in the East China Sea. Even so, after hearing Nami's question, Jinbei still replied, "Well, the 4 emperors are, the 444 pirates standing at the top of the sea." "The top of the sea?" Nami asked in a daze, "That is to say, it's very powerful." Jinbei glanced at Yagami Kingdo's back, and said solemnly, "If you are asking about that man, he is not very powerful, but the strongest in the world." "Iori, what do you want to do?" Qingzi watched Iori Kingdo vigilantly, and was already ready to make a move at any time. Of course, this shot was not an active attack, but was ready to resist Iori Kingdo's possible attack at any time. In front of Yagami Kingdo, he didn't have the confidence to take the initiative to attack alone, unless the tyrant Shang and Hokage beside him can safely join forces with him, but then it's impossible to think about it. Tyrant Bear is fine. Hokage sometimes ignores the call of the world government, not to mention the navy under the government. Don't be so nervous. Yagami Kingdo didn't go to see the blue pheasant, but walked towards Basque and said in a casual tone, "Seeing that you didn't ask anything, so I plan to torture myself." Torture? A hint of doubt flashed in the blue pheasant's eyes. He originally thought that Yagami Kingdo appeared here because he had some kind of partnership with the Golden Lion, trying to join forces to subvert the world government. But looking at the appearance of Yagami Kingdo, it doesn't seem to be standing on the side of the Golden Lion, but a different attitude. "Because I can't figure out the situation, and I have a clear understanding of Yagami Soto's fighting power." Aokiji did not choose to attack, but watched Yagami Sudo approaching Basque on alert. "The 8 Gods Kingdo." Basque looked at the 8 Gods Kingdo, his eyes flashing slightly, and said, "How to cooperate with us to have the plan of the Golden Lion boss, plus your fighting power, we can completely dominate the world." Yagami Kingdo is the 4th emperor, obviously not from the world government and the navy. He thought this was the end of the day, but he didn't expect Yagami Kingdo to appear here, and things seemed to turn around again. If Yagami Kingdo is willing to take action, mention saving them, even killing the green pheasant here is not necessarily a difficult task. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend, and share. Chapter 316. Sad Nami, the most dish in the audience. It's a pity. I don't plan to cooperate with anyone. It's not that I like to do it alone, it's that you are not worthy. Yagami Kingdo said indifferently. The past, what he said was no different from arrogance, but now he is one of the 4 emperors, and he has also defeated Whitebeard, ranking first in the sequence of the 4 emperors. With such an identity, saying such words is no longer arrogant, but overbearing. It belongs to the overbearing of the emperor. Although Yagami Kingdo was the 4 emperors, he represented the legend of the previous era. Shiki the Golden Lion, it would be arrogant to say such words. What he said, Yagami Kanto suddenly took a step forward. Murasama appeared in Yagami Kanto's hand in an instant, and the blade flashed a strange light. Seems that the blur has turned into a soul state, and it suddenly penetrated between Basque's eyebrows. This blow can be described as lightning fast. Aokiji and the others were all unable to make any movements when they reacted. Yagami Kingdo's blade had penetrated between Basque's eyebrows, causing everyone's pupils to shrink. Basque was completely unable to react, or in other words, half of his body was frozen, and he couldn't hide even if he reacted. But strangely, the sword pierced through his head, but there was no bloodstain. Instead, a strange power spread out in the void, that is the power of the soul fruit. Basque's eyes instantly turned white. Where is the golden lion? Yagami Soto closed his voice and asked Basque the same question that Aokiji asked before. Basque's face was full of fear, and he said, I don't know. I only know that after conquering this place, I will go to Rog Town to meet the Golden Lion boss. Hearing this sentence, Yagami Kengdu's brows suddenly relaxed. Sure enough, this Basque still knew valuable information. After all, he was also a big pirate who was imprisoned on the 6th floor of the city prison. He was considered a general under the Golden Lion, so he didn't know any information. Because Yagami Soto covered up his voice, Aokiji and the others did not hear what Hato and Basque said. They only saw Yagami Kanto's sword pierced Basque's head, but Basque was not dead. And he also showed a look of fear, and said something to Yagami Kanto. Are you sure it's Rogue Town? What are the Golden Lions doing there? Although Yagami Aoto knew that Basque might not lie in this state, he still asked another question. Basque shuddered and said, that's where Roger was executed. The Golden Lion boss will completely destroy it and let Roger Town sink to the bottom of the sea. So it is. There was a hint of understanding in the eyes of Yashin Kangdu. 5 fingers of the right hand, squeeze the hilt of the sword, and then lift the blade up. The power of the soul has converged, and the rest is the icy blade of the sword. This sword provoked, and a stream of blood plasma flew into the sky along with the white juice. Basque's head dropped, and he stopped moving. Hey, what have you done? Aokiji looked at this scene and couldn't help but speak to Yagami Kangdu in a deep voice. This was the prisoner he caught, and Yagami Soto killed him just like that. I know what I want to know. He's worthless. Yagami Kangdu replied casually, and at the same time glanced at Qingzi, and said lightly, so you intend to avenge him? This sentence is very light, but it contains a cold that seems to freeze human blood. In an instant, the temperature on the entire field seemed to drop a few degrees. As an admiral of the Navy headquarters, Aokiji also has his arrogance. But at this moment in front of Yagami Kangdu, he still flinched. He is not afraid to fight Yagami Kangdu, but fighting Yagami Kangdu here is meaningless. With the attitude of Tyrant Bear and Hokage unknown, he alone cannot stop Yagami Soto's actions. Smile, let's go. Yagami Kangdu withdrew his gaze. After glancing at Tyrant Bear and Hokage, he walked towards Fujitora. This time, Nami was just standing there stupidly watching what happened. Although Yagami Aoto hardly showed his superhuman strength, the fear on the face of Admiral Aokiji wearing the cloak of justice, the stern face of that Tyrant Bear and Hawk-eyed, plus the simple description of Jinbei next to him. There is no doubt that in this place, Yagami Soto is the real dominant existence, a monster more terrifying than those few monsters. Thinking of this, Nami's heart is like an overturned sea. She glanced at Fujitora next to her, and then at Jinping Hexia, who had obvious Murloc appearance, and suddenly found something sad. That there is only one ordinary person here. Chapter 317, The King's 7 Martial Seas, Murlocs are very flat. Yagami Kangdu noticed the change in Nami's gaze towards him, and he was very pleased with it. After walking over, he casually said to her, "With the Admiral of the Navy here, there is no need to worry about the safety of the village. Oh, by the way, it's best not to go to sea for a while, maybe we still have a chance to meet again." After leaving such a sentence, Yagami Sudo walked to Fujitora's side. Fujitora tapped the ground with a wooden stick, and the frozen ground shattered into a stone platform, which carried the two of them up into the sky. Seeing Yagami Kangdu leaving, Hawkeye also withdrew his gaze. Carrying the black knife on his back, Yi turned and left, and the tyrant bear disappeared with a flicker. Jinbei stayed, watching the silence for a while. I'm so sorry about Aaron. Since he came here, he naturally knew the situation here and knew that Aaron ruled here. Since the girl in front of her is an Aborigines here, she should be the one who was oppressed by Aaron, so Jinpei chose to apologize. It was he who failed to deal with Aaron's affairs, let Aaron come to the East China Sea, and never asked about it afterwards. You are. Nami turned around slightly stiffly, and only then did she have time to take a closer look at Jinpei. Seeing Jinping apologize to her, he was stunned for a while, not knowing what the relationship between the other party and Aaron was. Jinping said, "This old man is the king of Chihuahua, Jinping, the current boss of Fishman Street. Aaron's affairs are really lax, causing trouble for your excellency. The king's 7 Wuhai. It is another king who is under the 7 Marshal-seas, and it sounds like he is still the leader of the Murlocs. However, I have seen the Admiral of the Navy, the world's largest swordsman, the 4 emperors, and I have become a little numb to Jinbei's identity. Nami. Koko Village. The coast, Iori Soto and Fujitora returned to the boat. Since he knew that the Golden Lion was going to Rogue Town next, he naturally went to Rogue Town and waited. Let's go to Rogue Town, the next target of the Golden Lion is there. Yagami Aoto said briefly to Fujitora. Fujitora snorted, not feeling surprised. He held the wooden staff and said, Rogue Town, where Roger the Pirate King was executed. The beginning of the era of the great pirates. It would be more appropriate to end the Golden Lion there. The 8 gods Kangdu looked at the sea and slowly opened his mouth, his thoughts moved. Ripples in the space rolled up a stream, pushing the boat to sail away at a high speed. And just not far from Yagami Kanto's ship, a fierce battle broke out on the sea. The mutant beast in the sea found Luffy's group's ship, and launched a fierce attack on Luffy and others. Although this mutant beast is not a fish and is also affected in the sea, its power is still extremely fierce. Even if Luffy, Zoro and others joined forces to fight, they were still beaten by the mutant beast, and the boat was shattered. Damn it, this guy is too hard to beat. Sanji kicked the mutant beast's head, only to feel a pain in the foot bone, as if kicking an iron plate. Roar! The mutant beast roared and blasted Luffy out. Fortunately, Luffy is a rubber man, ignoring this bludgeoning blow, and grabbed the board with both hands at the critical moment. Although the whole person flew out, the arm also stretched a lot and bounced back. Damn, my wound. Sauron held the sword, but cold sweat dripped from his forehead, and the wound on his chest was cut by Hawkeye, and blood was overflowing. The fierce battle tore his still unhealed wound. But just as the Straw Hats were struggling, a small boat in the distance came breaking through the waves like a yacht. Look at the route not to collide, but to pass by. The copyright of the Have a Boat novel resource belongs to the original author. The text is only for personal study and trial reading. Please delete it within 24 hours after downloading. Please support subscribing to Genuine Novels and refuse piracy. This novel was first published by Dragon. Feilu's novel Internal Group 1,142,529,731. More wonderful Feilu novels are in the hands of the group owner. Welcome to the group. Fierce fight. Usopp was the first to spot the approaching ship, and shouted at Luffy and the others. Sauron gasped violently, endured the pain in his chest, and glanced in the direction Usopp said. It's a boat. It can't help much, kill this monster first. Sanji was in a state of embarrassment, but he still had a cigarette in his mouth, and he did not forget to take a puff at this time. When Luffy saw that his companions were in a desperate situation, he roared with all his strength, raised his right leg, and stretched wildly. Rubber rubber. Battle axe. Boom. The foot that fell from the sky was wrapped in huge power, and it kicked the head of the mutant beast with a bang. The mutant beast that was kicked in an instant was completely submerged in the sea water, splashing a huge wave. A few seconds later, the mutant beast surfaced again, but it did not attack Luffy and the others. Instead, his eyes turned white and floated on the sea, apparently knocked out by a heavy blow from Luffy. Huh. Got. Be saved. Sanji, Usopp and the others watched this scene, and they all breathed a long sigh of relief. If they continue to fight, not to mention that they can't bear it, and the ship can't bear the toss. But almost as soon as they breathed a sigh of relief, the fainted mutant beast floated into the distance on the sea. Coincidentally, it was the course of the small boat that was drifting in the distance. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 318, The Straw Hat Pirates in Crisis. Usopp touched the cold sweat on his head, and caught a glimpse of the direction the mutant beast was floating in. Was startled for a moment, and then, with the distance judgment of a sniper, he judged that the boat and the mutant beast were likely to collide. Oops! Usopp gave a strange cry in his heart, but immediately. Comfort yourself. That small boat will definitely avoid this dizzy mutant beast. After all, it is so conspicuous in its huge body. Under Usopp's gaze, the small boat came by the wind and waves, speeding all the way, and then, bang, the boat pressed directly over the body of the mutant beast, and sank the mutant beast into the bottom of the sea. Without realizing it, he continued to ride the wind and waves toward the distance. Few seconds later, the mutant beast that was awakened appeared to the sea, seemingly dazed. Slowly turning his head to look at Luffy and the others, the huge eyes gradually recovered fierceness, and an angry roar was heard. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji. Almost everyone was suffocating in their chests, and almost vomited blood in sadness. Looking at the mutant beast roaring and rushing over, he felt a little desperate. Luffy's blow with all his strength only knocked the monster unconscious, only to be woken up again by the damn ship. This is simply murder. But just as Sauron and the others gritted their teeth and could only bite the bullet, the boat in the distance suddenly stopped when they were fighting. An indistinct figure came out of the boat. The figure glanced at this side, then drew a sword and waved it at this side. In an instant, the sea collapsed. Under the shocked and horrified gazes of Sanji and others, the monster was enveloped by some kind of strange power. In just 1 second, it was crushed and crushed, turning into countless pieces of meat and bones. This moment, everyone's faces were dull and their minds were blank. After wielding this sword, that figure rides the wind and waves for a little while, going away quickly and disappearing into the world. To being shocked, there was only one thought left in everyone's heart. Who is that person? Donghai, Rog Town. After leaving Kokoja village, Yagami Soto and Fujitora arrived here quickly. However, it seems to have come a little earlier, and Rogue Town is still a peaceful town. Yagami Kangdu didn't care either. Since it's early, it doesn't matter if you have morning tea here, have dinner, or wait for a while. A few days later, in a tea house somewhere, Fujitora sat opposite Iori Soto, drinking morning tea with Iori Soto. Weather was dark, and it was raining lightly. It seems that there are some dark tides in this small town that was originally peaceful. Teams of Navy can be seen from time to time on the streets, and the level of rigor in patrolling is far greater than it was a few days ago. The atmosphere seems to have changed. Fujitora was drinking tea by the window, sensing the orderly passing Navy outside, as well as the unusual atmosphere that gradually pervaded this small town. He spoke quietly and slowly. Yagami Kangdu was holding a newspaper and looked out the window, saying, "Since I can know that this is the next target of the Golden Lion, then the world government and the Navy must have a way to get this information. If the government knew about it, it would probably send heavy troops to guard here." Fujitora spoke slowly, a little solemn in his words, but not very calm. Eight Gods Kangdu smiled and said, "Not to mention that their purpose is to stop the Golden Lion, so what if they come at me? Wouldn't it be possible to move the entire naval headquarters to Rogue Town? Except Carp, Sengoku people, who can pose some threats to today's Yagami Kangdu. Chingzi Akainu Kizaru and others hardly have the ability to threaten the life of Yagami Kanto." Fujitora continued drinking tea. At this moment, the corner of Yashin Kangdu's eyes suddenly swept to a figure walking in the alley outside the window, his eyes paused for a moment. He's here too. Hearing Iori Soto's words, Fujitora raised his head and looked at Iori Soto with a look of questioning. Eight Gods Kangdu withdrew his gaze, without lingering on the fleeting figure, and said, "Leader of the Revolutionary Army, long." Fujitora's face changed slightly, and he said, "The Revolutionary Army also got involved in this matter." "No." Iori Kangdu shook his head and said casually, "I think he has other purposes." Fujitora was lost in thought. And at this moment, another familiar figure of Yagami Kangdu appeared. And went straight into the tea house and ordered a cup of tea. "Go to a place and sit down, it is dusky." Her eyes looked a little melancholy and slightly haggard. Not wearing a navy uniform, compared to the last time I met Yagami Soto, it was a world of difference. Chapter 319. Rog Town, What is Justice? Tisk. Yagami Kangdu looked at Dusky and couldn't help but snort. It seemed that Dusky still hadn't recovered from the psychic shock he gave her last time. Soon. The tea was served. Dusky took the tea, said thank you, and then sipped the tea. "So long," the words of Yagami Kangdu kept echoing in her mind. And when she looked at the problem from a neutral point of view, she could no longer regard the justice of the Navy as her duty as before. It is precisely because Tiantian's heart is not languid that he overturned the teacup several times. Smog was a little annoyed and a little helpless, and temporarily suspended her from work and let her take a good rest for a while. Alas! Dusky wanted to get those voices out of her mind, but she couldn't do anything. Drinking tea at the moment, she couldn't help sighing. And at this moment, she inadvertently glanced at Yagami Soto and Fujitora who were sitting in the corner. And because he was facing Iori Kangdu, he was stunned when he saw Iori Kangdu's face. "Come over for a cup of tea." Yagami Kangdu waved at Dusky and smiled casually. In Dusky's eyes slowly subsided, she pursed her lips, and her expression changed for a while. The past, he must have drawn his sword immediately, but now his heart is in chaos. Finally, unable to control his body, he walked over. Captain of the Eight Gods Pirates. Walking to the side of Yagami Kanto, Dusky also saw Fujitora, and quickly recognized Fujitora's identity. "Why are you here?" Dusky was silent for a few seconds, and asked Iori Kangdu in a suppressed tone. The Eight Gods Kangdu took a sip of tea and said, "Where am I supposed to be my freedom, but since you asked, I'll find the Golden Lion to settle the account." Golden Lion. If it were a few months ago, Dusky would not be able to immediately think of the legendary pirate Golden Lion Shiki who had disappeared for 20 years. But recently, the entire East China Sea caused by the Golden Lion has been in chaos. The news of the Golden Lion is spreading everywhere. Naturally, she reacted immediately. "Yes." Yagami Kangdu said nonchalantly, "This guy has offended me, plus he did such a wrathful thing in the sea. It's time to send him to hell." Dusty was speechless for a while. If Yagami Soto was an admiral, she wouldn't find it strange to say such a thing. But Yagami Kangdu is one of the most terrifying pirates in this sea. Not knowing how to respond to Yagami Kangdu, Dusky bit her lip and couldn't help but sarcastically said, "But you're not doing less evil than the Golden Lion, right?" Kangdu glanced at her, raised his face, and said, "You can't talk nonsense. What evil things have I done? Please tell me a few things about your sergeant." "You." Dusky was speechless for a while. She has read a lot of newspapers and learned a lot about Yagami Soto in the Navy. But the descriptions of these things are all about the vicious big pirates, the 4 emperors who ruled all countries, etc. There is almost no information that can be specific to a certain thing. In other words, you only know that I am wicked, but you don't know where my evil is. Yagami Kangdu glanced at Dusky lightly. Dusky gritted his teeth for a while, but couldn't find anything to refute. "Okay." The Eight Gods Kangdu drank the last sip of tea in the cup and said, "I have finished the tea, I have to leave, do you have anything else to ask?" Dusky's expression changed for a while, but he stopped talking. It wasn't until Yagami Kangdu had stood up and walked out that she gritted her teeth and asked, "What the hell is justice?" Ha! Iori Kangdu couldn't help but chuckle and said, "You really asked a very troublesome question. No one can answer this question, everyone has everyone's answer." "Then what's your answer?" Dusky continued to ask. She knows it's weird and ridiculous to ask a pirate question, but she just wants to hear the answer from Yagami Soto. "I don't have an answer." Iori Kangdu walked to the door of the tea house and gave Dusky a completely unexpected answer. Glancing at her, he said, "Why should I bother about what justice is? In Rogue Town. The Straw Hats have just arrived here. Why so many navy?" On the street, Zoro, who was about to buy a knife, avoided a team of one patrolling navy, frowning slightly. There were hardly many civilians seen along the way, and there were patrolling navies passing by from time to time. Could it be that this town is so heavily guarded? Although Zoro has a big heart, he still has reason. By the navy in this place would definitely cause a lot of trouble. Although he won't be caught by the navy, he and Luffy and the others have to escape from here as soon as possible, so they can't buy knives. Seeing the patrolling navy passing by, Zoro walked out of the alley and looked for a knife shop. However, just as he was walking across the street, he suddenly noticed a man and a woman walking across the street. A sword hangs from the woman's waist, and a sword hangs from the man's waist. Philo reminds you, 3 things to read, collect, recommend and share. Chapter 320, Chaos, Monsters Falling from the Sky. Who was following behind Yagami Kangdu, noticed Zoro, and at the same time saw the words Hidao on Zoro's waist, and couldn't help but let out a groan. The depressed mood was instantly attracted by the famous sword. This is 21 words of Dakue Dao and Dao Yi. Dusky held up the glasses on the bridge of her nose, and couldn't help walking to Zoro's side, about to take Zoro's sword to observe. Zoro was startled, took 2 steps back subconsciously, and said vigilantly, "Hey! What are you doing?" Only then did Dusky, who had a stunned expression, notice the person Sauron. After being stunned for a while, he immediately apologized, and for a while, he couldn't wait to find a hole to dig into. Zoro saw that Dusky apologized continuously and was a woman again, and said, "Forget it, you seem to know a lot about knives." "Ah, a little research." Dusky said embarrassedly, "Can you show me your knife?" Handed the word Hidao, and at the same time looked at the knife on Dusky's waist and thought for a while, and said, "You are also a famous knife." "Yes." Dusky took Zoro's knife, and when she heard this, she took down her shiu. Handing it to Zoro, he said, It's a good and quick sword with 50 workers, shiu, which is 1 level worse than Hidao Yuan." She spoke, she pulled out the word Hidao and looked at it carefully. Recognizing that this is indeed the real product, I couldn't help but praise a few words. Although he was a little speechless about Dusky's abruptness, Dusky's knowledge of swords and swords was a bit of a conversation with Sauron. "By the way, is there a shop selling knives nearby?" Took back the words of Hidao, he asked Dusky a question. Dusky nodded and said, "Do you want to buy a knife? There is one over there. I'll take you there." "Thank you. Welcome." Dusky agreed, and only then did he think of Kangdu, who was next to him. Yagami Kangdu was not impatient, but his eyes stayed on Zoro for a few seconds. 3 of them walked towards the store in the distance together, and along the way, Zoro's eyes from time to time looked at Murasama on Yagami Kangdu's waist. "You shouldn't be a swordsman, right?" Zoro looked at Muramura, then looked at Yagami Kangdu. Although the sword on Yagami Kangdu was famous, he did not feel any similar feeling in Yagami Kangdu, which means that Yagami Kangdu should not be a swordsman. 8 Gods Kangdu nodded and said indifferently, "I am indeed not a swordsman." Hearing Yagami Kangdu's admission, Zoro couldn't help shaking his head slightly. "It's a pity that a famous sword has fallen into the hands of someone who is not a swordsman. But it is impossible for him to grab the famous sword in Yagami Kangdu's hand, even if Yagami Kangdu is not a swordsman. A group of 3 people quickly came to a knife shop. However, Yagami Kangdu suddenly blinked slightly. Looking up, the probe grabbed Dusky's collar and dragged her back. Boom! With a loud bang, a gigantic monster fell from the sky. The knife shop collapsed instantly from above, and there was a roar. This monster that fell from the sky immediately noticed the 3 of Yagami Kangdu 3. In its eyes, raised its claws in a roar, and attacked the 3 of Yagami Kangdu. It's finally started. Yagami Kangdu looked at this monster without any emotion. Instead, he released his domineering arrogance and began to look for the golden lion in the whole town of Rog. At the same time, Zoro looked stunned when he saw Yagami Kangta and Dusky. Immediately pulled out Hidai, and faced the monster with a reckless blow. You two go away. Having fought against this kind of monster before, Sauron knew very well the strength of this kind of monster. Even if his injury has recovered now, it will be very difficult to beat this monster, not to mention there are 2 oil bottles next to him. Zoro's voice fell, only a series of roars appeared. 3 or 4 times in a row, the head monster fell from the sky and fell on this street one after another. Several buildings were smashed and collapsed, and the terrifying atmosphere instantly swept away. This. Dusky looked at those monsters, and his pupils contracted violently. She had gone out to sea to fight this kind of monster once before, but she couldn't beat it at all. Was Smog who took action to kill the monster. Facing 4 or 5, with a terrifying aura on his hair and a roaring monster, Dasichi couldn't help but tremble in his heart. Even if I pulled out my shiu, I didn't feel any sense of security. Damn, there are so many. Sauron also saw the numerous monsters appearing one after another, and could not help but grit his teeth. If he is one end, he can still fight hard, so much so that he can only escape. Boom, boom, boom. The building was continuously destroyed by many monsters. The monster in front of Yagami Kantu shot Zoro away with one blow. Then we will continue to attack Yagami Kanto and Dasuki.